Now, you might think Gary's a bit of a cock, and he is a bit of a cock, but he's my cock. I'm Eddie Webb.
I'm Chris Spivey.
And today we're going to talk about The World's End here on Genreless. Hello and welcome to what might be the end of the Cornetto trilogy.
All I can say is
fuck
a doodle do.
Fuck a doodle do. So yes, this is The World's End. This was 6 years after Shaun of the Dead.
About that.
Something like that.
If not
Yeah.
exactly.
So Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and then World's End were all pretty quickly produced in succession, it seems.
I'm sorry. I think this is 6 years after Hot Fuzz.
Oh.
Because there was a large gap between, I want to say, Hot Fuzz and this. That's me spitballing off the top of my head, though, so I could be wrong.
Okay. That makes more sense because it does. I did notice that some of the actors seem to have visibly aged between movies, and so I was going to make a comment about how hard Hot Fuzz must have been to produce, but this makes more sense.
Yeah. Because wow, it's been so long now since we even talked about Shaun that it feels like a lifetime ago. I don't remember when it was made.
Well, I know actually. I think it was like it must have been the early 2000s because it was shortly after Spaced, and that Spaced was 99. So, and I thought.
But anyway, you were saying they've visibly aged as we all have as we walk through life, and this ever going movement towards retirement, which is where I hope to be very soon, Eddie.
And good luck. Because the retirement schemes for being self-employed are not great.
And I live in America.
America. Yeah, I actually have a pension where the government actually pays into. It's crazy. Nonsense. Socialism.
Where now they're going to take it all away and slash it in half and give it to rich people. But you were saying the world's end. Oh, wait, we're already there now. So
it's one thing that I don't know if it was intentional or not, but certainly struck me because this was done after Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yes. You can tell by some of the fight scenes.
Right. And so there's very much a vibe of let's get the band back together for one more ride, which parallels well with the actual plot of the movie. So the characters are going through one attempt to try to reclaim their glory days, and there's a bit of vibe of also a lot of the actors in this trying to kind of recognizing they're not the same people they were when they made Spaced. And so I don't think it was meant to be like unironic. I think there's a bit of this is why we're not going to make a new season of Spaced, because look at us. Look, this is what it would feel like, right? I feel like there's a bit of irony there of, yeah, we're going to do one more movie and we're going to have fun with it, but also let's just say the quiet part out loud with how this movie's put together and the plot of it.
Well, I heard part of it is that Wright originally had an idea for just the beginning of I'm not going to go into the film because we're that in a minute, but just an initial idea for kids going on a pub crawl was like his idea that he had.
Right.
But then I want to say it was Super Bad or something came out, and he saw that and he was like, well, fuck, I can never make this movie now because that other movie's out that far surpasses this. And sort of then combined it with the idea of how everything is now obsessed with our childhood to go back and tell that to us and kind of like merge those two into one.
Yeah. And it's definitely a critique of nostalgia, which I found very interesting, especially for being the third movie of the trilogy, and the trilogy itself being kind of a celebration of a specific creative team. So it was definitely here's one last ride, and we're gonna make this the biggest feeling movie that we've ever done. but also it's kind of a bit shit that we're actually even doing this, which I liked. I actually thought it gave a good energy to the film, frankly. Mm.
Um, Interesting. Did you like the flip though with Frost now being more serious for the movie? Because that's what I was gonna comment last time, but since you hadn't seen it, I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, you're right. Like, there definitely seems like there was a trend happening, specifically with Peg. But then you're right. They do invert that where Peg is still the lead, obviously, but you're right that they're moving the archetypes around again, and it kind of reminded me of when we talked back during the Sherlock Holmes run of when sometimes um, Nigel Bruce and Basil Rathbone would play opposite parts just for one night. There's a bit of that vibe of like, what if Sean Pegg played a Nick Frost character, and what if Nick Frost played a Sean Pegg character, and what would that look like? And it wasn't quite to them doing parodies of each other specifically, but there certainly was walking up to that line a couple of times.
And this is also the one that proves that Nick Frost is an actor,
Yeah.
which before you could have been like, I don't know. Eh. You're very
There's
much
a
like Michael Cera. You got that one note.
right, right. There when I first started watching this, I was like, okay, cool. You know, you're right. Like Nick Frost has range, that's great. And then there's one specific scene we'll get to when we get to Paul when we get there that was genuinely good. Right. I mean, all their acting has been fun and interesting and very comedic. But there's one scene where it's just Peg and Frost, and they are sincerely jaw-droppingly good actors.
Yes.
And again, I think it's another reason why this I so cards on the table, I actually like this movie. I've never seen it before. First time I watched it was for this. Um, and I think one of the reasons why I liked it was because it was, here's all the stuff that you think you want in this movie, but we're gonna mix it up and do other things to show you that we are more than just those dumb guys who made that dumb zombie movie and that dumb cop movie. And
Dumb
you and I
cop
have talked
movie.
about the layers in both of those movies that we have noticed, but that was not, to my understanding, the cultural perception of those movies.
Well, we're approaching them with our analytical hats on. We didn't
Right,
say, "Hey, Eddie, let's grab a pint, and then let's go watch a flick together."
right.
We decided we wanted to like look at it, think about how it's built and everything else, cinematography and the acting, and then like discuss those points. I don't want to be too I don't know the word I'm looking for. But anyway, the common viewer doesn't go in with that. They're going in for what they thought would be a funny movie, which on one
Sh
part though is what hurt this film to some extent.
Right, and I mean, it was, the lowest earning of the 3 films, although it still exceeded expectations, which is good. Also, weirdly, it's the shortest. I just noticed that. But it is interesting because I could totally see why people went to this expecting more of the same, and they got something that was not exactly that and didn't like it. And I feel like given normally, I would be like, maybe it was a misfire, or maybe they just lost their mojo, whatever, but given what the movie's about, I have to feel like it's intentional. I have to feel like it's "We know what you want. We're not doing that. We're doing this for us because we wanna show you what we can do."
And it's something I think that we can resonate with as creators who can
Yeah.
create multiverses, and people only expect you to be able to create this one niche thing because that is what they like and that is how they view you. It pushes people because people aren't necessarily comfortable with things that they can't define. And if they
Mhm.
can prove that they're vast, great actors, that means they're breaking the conventions that people have tried to box them into.
Right. Now you had seen this movie once before on at least once before on the podcast, right?
Yeah. I saw it when it came out, and then I think I saw it once after that because I bought the Blu-ray because I was a collector.
Right.
But it's been well over about a decade since I've seen it. Because
Um,
Jill doesn't love like the Cornetto trilogy, so it's not something I have free time, and then I go with my very minute amount of free time. You know what? I want to rewatch some of the Cornetto trilogy.
right.
Instead, with my free time, I want to go. I want to go make a podcast with my friend Eddie to make him watch an array of things he hasn't seen, or I want to play video games, or I should do the thing that I'm not doing and write for this deadline that I have that's due in 2 days.
Right. Um, but you have just revealed that the whole reason of this podcast is just an excuse to watch the things that you want to watch that your wife won't watch with you.
About a good 50% of it, yeah. Because then people make me watch shit like Batman Returns as payback for
You're
my
never gonna let that fucking go, are you?
exploding penguins, Eddie. Exploding penguins.
You say this like it's a bad thing, but it's a good thing.
Never, 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 never.
Yes, but for those of you, actually, it would have been. This is a couple weeks after our Christmas episode, so certainly Chris does not have the exclusive rights to talk about choosing bad Christmas movies. Differences is that I defended my choice.
Well, the difference is I realized it was bad. So then therefore I didn't make you go and spend 3 hours talking about this bad movie. Because that is how much I care about you, my friend. You, on the other hand, went, this is shit. I will torture my friend with it. Ha
No,
ha.
I stand by the fact that I genuinely enjoy that film. I did not intend to torture you. I thought it was great because it has
But
exploding penguins.
but we're here to talk about The World's End that does not have exploding penguins.
Right.
But
It's different
they could have
exploding
probably had a
things.
joke about it.
Um, so I mean, like I said, I frankly this movie just kind of passed me by entirely. Um, do you remember at all like what the kind of critical reception of it was? It seems like officially it was kind of mixed reviews from like
I
professional
think so.
critics.
I don't really remember. I didn't look this time either, but I think they were mixed because it goes back to the fact that people weren't expecting this. Seriously, this could have been just the friends going out as a whole movie itself, and it would have been phenomenal. The added twist and then making it a lot more serious, I think, turned off a lot of people.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's interesting because like this so like we talked before about how these movies are ultimately kind of a collision of two genres, and this one is the weirdly there is a entire kind of small genre of movies which are middle-aged men trying to recapture their youth and doing stupid shit. It's your bridesmaids, your um, I can't think of titles, but I mean I know that I've seen lots of movies like this. The Getaway, The
Didn't
Weekends.
didn't Captain Archer have an entire TV series about that?
I haven't watched that, I wouldn't know.
Uh, he was an Archer in it, but Scott Bakula, I want to say, had some TV series. What was that now? Like 5 years ago, where there's a group of him and older dudes about his age running around doing things.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a vague recollection because I never watched the show, but that's what it looked like.
Right. But with the other two movies, uh, the twist into the second genre is the genre you're expecting to see. Because Shaun of the Dead is twisted into a zombie film, so we're expecting that. Hot Fuzz, it twists into an American style cop action movie, and we're expecting that. This one, uh, it's the alien invasion genre, and the twist is not foreended, even though it's the world's end. It's like it's about a pub called the World's End, and it's about the end of the world. I mean, seems like a it's one thing when you see it, it's like, oh yeah, I see what happened there. Um, but you're right. I knew the twist going in just because I read the summary on the thing I rented it on. But it's definitely not as foreshadowed as the previous two.
Yeah, which I liked. Did you know that most of the actual places that were already real pubs? They just kind of had to change some of the signage. I think some of them were also in. God, I vaguely remember this. I think the town they wanted to use. Let me rephrase that. The town they wanted to use was I want to say it was like very religious town, so it didn't have
Mhm.
pubs in them. So they went to other places to take pictures of pubs and change the name so they could still use that town.
Mm, okay.
And the World's End is a real pub. They just added the little World's End
Yes.
sign on it and said, which was fascinating.
I did know the World's End was an actual pub because, when I was, looking up information about this, I kept getting the pub in the research results as well as the movie. Um, and yeah, and there are certainly some pub gags that there's specific ones I'll call out when we get to that I liked, but um, like the pub crawl is a thing. But again, one of the things that I liked about this movie is that I expected the men getting back together to do a pub crawl story to go a very specific way, and it didn't. I expected it to be and this is why being drunk is silly and fun and great. And so what's interesting to me is that living here in the UK right now, uh, um, pub culture is kind of going through a weird moment and has been for a bit. Uh, Lots of pubs are closing down; they're just not able to make as much money. Uh, and some of those pubs are getting bought up by chains to become chain pubs. But um, there was a survey done a couple of years ago, I think, that where people in their 20s right now are statistically less likely to drink than any other generation in the past. So drinking culture in the UK is going through a huge shift, and so a lot of pubs have more soft drinks, non-alcoholic beers, more events to kind of entice people to come there. And I was surprised this movie actually directly engaged that on some level, in the fact that
Yeah.
drinking culture in the UK is complicated and it's not as straightforward as is seen both in the outside and also from people who glorified it in the past. And so it was a really it's another piece of the movie that I really really liked was that I expected it to be a certain way and it wasn't. It was just like no, it's some people have bad experiences and it shapes their life as a result of drinking too much and this is what it can do to you and the idealized version in your head versus the reality of it is sometimes very very different. So yeah, it's tacking that conversation onto a movie about nostalgia was a fascinating choice.
Absolutely. Since we keep knocking on the door of the summary, do you want to go ahead and dive into it?
Yeah,
Is there
let's go
anything
ahead
else you
and
want to talk about for
get
it?
into it. All right. So Gary King, who is an immature 40-year-old alcoholic, decides to recapture his youth by contacting his boyhood friends Oliver Chamberlain, Peter Page, Stephen Prince, and Andrew Knightley, and invited them to complete the so-called Golden Mile, which is a pub crawl encompassing the 12 pubs of their hometown of Newton Haven, the last of the pub being the World's End. The group attempts to crawl as they did in teens in 1990, but in 1990 they failed to reach the final three pubs. Andy, now a teetotaler due to a drunk driving incident years before and involving himself and Gary, reluctantly agrees to join after Gary lies that his mother is dying. So this is all kind of the setup before the actual pub crawl, as well as the flashbacks to the 90s. And I liked how they filmed the 90s chunk of it.
Yeah. Right. Use
It
some
looked
sort of hand cam, I think, just to have that grainy look to it.
Yeah, it looked like exactly that. It looked like someone had filmed it on a 90s era hand cam. And so it's a nice visual shortcut for this is nostalgia. But it's a common thing to obviously cast young actors to play the younger version of the characters in the movie, but they did something which was a nice bit later on. So I'll just kind of leave that there for a moment. But I'll say I do enjoy the casting they made for those younger versions of all these characters.
When you were graduating from high school, Eddie, is that how you and your friends felt roaming through the halls like you owned the school in
No,
your long black trench coats?
no. Um, and that's and that was interesting because like it was 1990. It's a very specific date, right? And how young Gary King and the fact that older Gary King dressed exactly the same way because it looks exactly like a lot of LARPers I know from vampire scene trying to recapture their youth. And just like it's a very specific moment in time. But also it was also specifically a date before Columbine,
Yeah.
where the long black trench coat look gained a very different connotation.
Hmm. So that's
I found
fascinating.
that interesting. But also, I mean, the mix of styles, right? Like, it was just King that dressed like that. It had that kind of heavy goth look. Most of the other teenagers were more kind of the tie and shirts look. So it was interesting. Some of that was the kind of late '80s new wave look, and then Gary King was like that early '90s look. So like you can see kind of the transition in styles of that 1990s specific moments, whereas not quite the '80s, not quite the '90s yet. It was an interesting moment.
Are you saying that Gary King at this in the high school was cutting edge? He was like the future
Yeah,
waiting to happen almost?
he probably. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why he was so exciting to all of these people in his youth because he was ahead of the time, and then he got stuck in that moment.
We do should take a minute to talk about the last names because we mentioned it in passing kind of in Hot Fuzz, but here the last names are essential to each character that we encounter for the core group. Like irritatingly like hitting you over the head with a brick so.
Right, because Gary King is the head of the group. Stephen Prince is kind of one of his subordinates. Andrew Knightley is the guy who defends him all the time. Peter Page is the person who likes to communicate and talk to people, and Oliver Chamberlain is one who kind of handles all the logistics. And so, yeah, it is a royal court of very clear names.
And Paige would be the essentially like the youngest one who would be the most inexperienced, and you get a lot of that throughout like the course of the movie
Oh, right, yeah,
for Peter. So that's like hits you over the head, but at the same time, it's a quick shorthand that's nice.
yeah.
And it's one of the constant like reoccurring beats of this movie. Even like their pub crawl walk that we see as they go through it is going to be exactly repeated in more detail when we get into the rest of the movie.
Right. We talked before about how Hot Fuzz had a stealth third genre in it, and this one also has a stealth third genre, which is Arthurian romance, which is not what I expected when I first started watching this movie. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it. He's the king, and that's kind of funny." And I kind of got the last names a bit later, but no, that's actually the underpinning of the whole movie is this Arthurian knight legend.
Yeah. Okay. You changed it to like just author in general because otherwise I was going to ask you what is an Arthurian romance, Eddie?
Right. Um, Arthurian romances are the well, romances originally, not in the sense of people who want to have sex with each other, but in the original romance were heightened emotional stories. And so Arthurian romances are stories about King Arthur and his knights. And the original stories are told in the sense of meant to be heightened realities and heightened emotional stakes as they go on these adventures. So it's a lot of what we would now call adventure stories or even pulp in some levels. That's just kind of where romance kind of evolved into from the original term of romance. So yeah, we're really just talking about the original legends of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table is what that kind of shorthand for.
If I don't know if you know this because I don't know this one, so I'm going to throw it out for you. If I was someone that was suddenly now interested in reading about King Arthur, is there a specific story or book I should start with Mr. Eddie Webb, who lives over there, that would know all about King Arthur simply from a geography standpoint?
Um, uh, so the one that is usually translated is there was a French compilation of the stories, which I believe is called L'Auteur de Mort, and that got translated into English around the Victorian era or slightly before, and that's kind of the go-to for most of the default Arthurian romances. Um, but honestly, there's been so many riffs on it since then. You can't throw a rock and not hit them. There's actually a pretty good one. Gillian, Kieran Gillian did a comic book series about a guy in modern day who discovers that he's Arthur and what that is like and goes through. I
Is is that the
believe it's called Camelot, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
all right? I'm thinking something else. I was thinking of like it was modern day. I think it was around 12, 13 issues. It was some guy that was a baseball bat that became Excalibur. God, I don't remember the name
No,
of it now.
that's a different one. There's a lot of them. That's the thing. Is it's like there's a lot of King Arthur style myths. I mean, there's King Arthur in space. There's King Arthur giant robots. I mean, there's a lot of these. So finding an Arthurian myth in a movie is not necessarily a surprise. The fact that it is buried in a movie about nostalgia and alien invaders is a bit of a surprise. But then when you think about it, British King Arthur and the Arthurian stories are part of British myth in the same way that the American West is part of American myth.
Yeah.
So finding a British movie about nostalgia that ties into King Arthur is not, in retrospect, a surprise.
Hmm. What is your favorite King Arthur movie,
Uh,
or the one that you dislike the most? Give you an easy out.
the easy answer is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because if you are a RPG player of a certain age, it will have been quoted at a game that you have played in.
Yes, and
Sometimes too often.
someone will have a servant named Patsy.
Right, right. But even then, like the '80s movie Excalibur, I also remember, but I had not watched it probably since then, so I don't know if it's aged well.
Funnily enough that you mentioned that movie specifically, because in the other Christmas movie that shall not be named, we're going to do, Nigel Bennett, or whoever he is that plays King Arthur in that movie, is in that Christmas movie. I want to say it was one of his first movies.
Huh. Huh. That's interesting.
Like I said, it had everybody in it, and it should have been good.
Yeah, and it just somehow was. This movie also had everybody in it too,
For
like
instance,
Pierce Brosnan.
I want to say that he got upset that Dalton got to be in Hot Fuzz, and he reached out to him. I don't know if that's how it worked, but he was like, Dalton got to be in that? I want to be in the next one.
Right. I feel like because I'm watching it and they have the flashback, and it's just like a short scene of Pierce Brosnan as like the school counselor or whatever, and I'm like, on the one hand, that can't be the only thing he does in this movie, but on the other hand, it does seem like kind of crack that Pierce Brosnan was like, I just want to be in for like 5 minutes, right? I want you on set, give me a role. Turns out he has a bigger part to play, so that it's fine. But it definitely felt like after Hot Fuzz is like, now we have to collect all the bonds. Now, what if we put a bond in every movie?
But this, I don't know if it came out beforehand, but this movie has doubled down on Bonzo because we also have Rosamund Pike in this movie.
Really?
You don't remember she was in James Bond, do you? She was a Bond girl in the very bad James Bond movie with Pierce Brosnan, and
Uh,
had Madonna in it. She was, I want to say
oh
Rosamund Pike
God.
played somebody Frost. It was a really, really bad one where I want to say Bond gets kidnapped by, was it the Koreans? I can't remember. But the general in it then has facial surgery to become a white dude that taunts Bond for the rest of the movie.
Oh God. Okay.
She's in
I
that one.
admit the 90s and early 2000s bonds are the ones that I know the least about, and I'm slowly making my way up to them. But I'm in the slog of Roger Moore right now.
Ugh.
It's. I remember Roger. I remember liking Roger Moore when I was a kid, and now I'm watching him like, oh, these movies are bad. Hot take, but these movies are not good.
Well, that's all right. So behind the scenes, we're like totally going to talk about the World's End in a second. Behind the scenes, one of the things that we're debating is doing a Bond run.
Right.
But I pointed out to Eddie that those movies have some high points, but there's a lot of, as you've already encountered now, there's a
Right.
lot of schlock in those movies. And so
Yeah.
we haven't figured out how we'd want to do a Bond run. I think we do something similar to like we choose each of the Bonds and we each do one movie from that Bond, kind of how we did for Doctor Who, and then move on.
Honestly, that we'd have to, because like there are, at least so far, it's like there's like every time I look into ranking the movies, it's usually this is the best of this Bond. You know, like you said, Brosnan. Like Goldeneye was apparently really good, and everything else was just terrible. Um, so I mean, like I think it's probably how we have to do it.
Michelle Yao shows up in the second one. I forgot what it's called right now for Brosnan. And Michelle Yao is exceptional.
Tomorrow Never Dies, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
But that was also the time where, God, I know too much about fucking Bond. That was a time where they kept bringing in leading female actresses to try to create spin-offs from Bond when Pierce Brosnan was there.
right, okay.
Because that's where Halle Bailey was. Halle Berry. and Michelle Yao, and I want to say there was one more who I don't remember, but they kept trying to get another spin-off series to move away from it.
Well, I mean, that's like I said, I haven't watched through those yet. I want to because I just because I don't know much about that era. Um, but certainly, I'm now into like the third or fourth. There's like so many Roger Moore movies. I think it's like
Yeah,
7 of them.
too
And
many.
I'm at Man with Golden Gun. I remember this last one I watched, and we're definitely hitting the. It should be good based on what the description is, but it's not. And it's yeah. Anyway, we should do a Bond run at some point. We've talked about it a couple times, but it's complicated, it's challenging, and there's a lot of isms that we have to work through, which is the reason why we're reluctant.
I can already tell you that through the Bonds, I know the movie I'd choose for them already.
Okay,
But I'm not going to say because if we ever do it, people need to be surprised.
right.
Anyway, Bond and Rosamund Pike, two people in the Bond series, show up here. I still say Pierce Brosnan was pissed that Dalton got to be in a movie that was so
Honestly,
successful.
it vibes. The other thing that I noticed, which makes me think that Brosnan had a bit of say in this, is that you don't notice it here. You notice it more later in the movie, but more of his natural Irish accent is actually heard, when usually he does isn't allowed to do that.
Nice. Is that kind of
So
how David Tennant doesn't get to use his real accent for Doctor Who?
right, and because Doctor Who is his breakout role, most every other role he's also doing basically as the Doctor is Doctor's accent. I think like just recently he's on a show called Rivals, and I think he's using a Scottish accent in that one. But that's it's such a thing that's the source of the gag in Doctor Who when they go to Scotland and the Doctor briefly uses a Scottish accent because that's David Tennant just talking normally.
Oh, we'll always be a Doctor Who podcast.
Right.
It was
Anything else about the early chunk of the movie
well.
that we're not talking about?
I want to talk. So we talked a lot about the high school, but I think we're going to do a big jump more into the movie proper. But before that, we need to touch on how Gary goes around and recruits all of his friends and in what order, like as
Yeah.
adults. From because we get a great scene of Gary telling people about this fantastic night that comes from this. And that one person who in the entire room who's listening to him that asks him, "Do you regret it?" And he realizes that they never completed this thing. So he's been telling the story for like his whole life about how amazing he was and how awesome they were to do this one thing. And it was something they never finished.
Right. I did notice a very strong one thing it seems Wright likes to do is I'm going to put something in front of you that's going to tell you everything you need to know, but I'm going to give you no context for it, and then you won't realize what it means too much later. And so, like you said, that scene you're talking about, he's very clearly in therapy,
Yeah.
and so we start with a narration talking about how amazing it was, and then cut to therapy, and like the therapists are like, "So that happened," basically, you know. It's very clearly like that was not what he's supposed to be talking about. And then, yeah, one of the other people in the therapy session is like, "Do you regret it?" And then we cut to him recruiting everybody. And so that just never gets touched on for a good chunk of the movie. But it pays a really big thing later. But also, it gives you context for Gary out of the gate, combined with the fact that he is dressed exactly as he was in 1990. Um, so it's the something. This means something to him on a level that is much deeper than anybody else. He
And
needs this on some fundamental level.
for the therapy session though, it's just not Gary and a therapist. It is a group therapy session,
Group
which
therapy session, right? Mhm.
also infers its own number of things that it could be. So it's not, and that would mean also that Gary potentially isn't affluent because he's not laying on like a couch talking to a therapist. It's in a very large setting. Everyone is dressed like they
Uh,
may be there because they're all dressed very similar.
I will say, and this is I don't know if this is something that's changed since the movie was shot or something that's been around. But therapy is actually extremely easy to get in the UK, and through the NHS. So, I mean, him not having a personal therapist is not necessarily a sign of lack of wealth. But that said, most of the free therapy, at least that I've been through, have been either phone calls or have been group sessions. But I don't know how much that also was because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
Where they moved to phone calls in virtual settings. So uh, uh, I don't know if there's necessarily at that point intended to be a financial component of it, but certainly how everyone was dressed and the way it was presented looked like it was in kind of a community center type thing. Does slant towards this is probably NHS free therapy, or rather than a private therapy.
Yeah. And as I can't speak to that with absolute certainty, because from what I've seen and read about, it's primarily been one-on-one for most therapy sessions, unless there is like usually a financial component involved or
Okay.
a court ordered mandate of some kind.
Well, that's the other thing is that from a purely from a media standpoint, usually if someone's in a group therapy session, it heavily implies some kind of addiction.
Hmm.
And so I think what the intent is that, he's in a therapy session, the action happens, but you don't have the context of why he's in therapy. But then he immediately goes on to an alcoholic binge. So it's implied that maybe he was there for alcohol abuse.
Hmm.
And that's not entirely true, but we don't know that at this point in the movie.
And then the order that he recruits his friends in is sort of fascinating because, of course, he would start with Peter, who we established would be like the page, would be the most inexperienced one and easier to sway to whatever his line of thinking is.
Mhm.
And
Right,
then using that as a foundation to get other people.
right. And the thing is that and actually I love this because like he straight up lies. We as the audience know it. Um, although it's an interesting twist because he's like, "Oh yeah, no, Andy's on board." I was like, "Really? After what happens?" And we don't know what happens. And from a normal movie, it would be very clear cut that he is just lying to get people on board. But because we've watched so much of Edgar Wright specifically, I didn't know if the cut was we didn't see the conversation with Andy at first. Because that is exactly the kind of move he would make, of where he's already had the
So
conversation, we just don't see it.
I'm torn on that because if he'd said that, then for me, when the first time I saw it, if he'd said that, I would have then expected an Edgar Wright move to like shoot over to him talking to Andy
Right,
versus
right.
just not saying it. For a God, I forgot his name now since I'm so early. For Ryan Johnson, I would have expected not to have seen that, just for it to have been referenced, and then we move on.
Right, right. Well, I thought the gag was going to be was that because all the conversations except for the penultimate one cut off right when it says Andy, are you sure? And they immediately moves to the next person he's talking to. So I thought the gag was going to be at the last one. You pan over, you see Andy. He's like, "Yeah, I'm fine with it," right? Because again, also because we're going through the other characters, it's like okay, one of these has to be Nick Frost, and so if Andy's all right with it, it's probably gonna be a Nick Frost type character based on what we've seen before, who's totally down to party and be chaotic. So it was a neat kind of double twist. So like if you're just watching the movie relatively cold, the twist is he's lying to his friends, and already we're not sympathetic to Gary. But if you're a huge Edgar Wright fan and a fan of Peg and Frost specifically, you don't know where Frost fits into this right away, and waiting for the shoe to drop, and then the shoe dropping is there is no gag. You know, the gag is Nick Frost is playing a very straight laced character. That's the quote unquote joke.
I love that, and the fact that he then straight up lies about his mom, but he pays him the $600 that he owes him, which sounds like nothing. He just like drops it, and you figure, all right, that's just going to not come back.
Right. And then you find out the reason why we cut so fast from the conversation is that he borrowed money from each of the other friends to pay back Andy.
Ah, such like the little things.
Right.
And
Anything else about this chunk? Oh, God. Sorry.
the fact that they all can't believe this shit up. But my last point is going to be when the cop stops them when they're almost in the town.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And you find out that it's the exact same car that he's had since high school. And the plates are the exact same. They've all belonged to Peter this whole time.
Hmm.
It shows you constantly reinforcing that Gary is a self-centered bad character, like trying to like put that completely in the forefront of your minds to ignore any sort of charm or charisma Peg has, that this is a bad person. But
Did you also?
Peg's
Oh, go ahead.
natural charisma keeps you watching him and kind of rooting for the character.
Yeah, no. Peg is playing an asshole here. But you're right. He's very much the charismatic asshole. He's the Dr. Gregory House, if you will, kind of like. I don't like this person, but I cannot stop watching him. And
Yeah.
but did you notice the very brief Ship of Theseus gag around the car?
Yes, from how all the pieces that are removed and still the same car.
Right. Yeah. Like literally everything's been replaced. But you know, it's the same car, which spoke to his obsessive need to live in 1990.
But I think we can also that we know a lot of people like that who get stuck in that one moment that they consider to be their greatness.
Oh yeah.
And in
Yeah.
one part, it's simply you feel bad for them because they can't move past that.
And I think that's why Gary works in this chunk of the movie is because he is 100% a manipulative asshole. He abuses his friends, he manipulates them, and seems completely unabashed about it. But we do feel sorry for him because because of that frame, that part where he's in therapy, we know that something is wrong with Gary. And I don't know if the gag of him lying about his mother dying was supposed to be something we were supposed to believe in. I didn't, based on how
No,
Gary had presented. It was like, "Oh yeah, my mom dead." The way the line was delivered, I felt like it was another lie. So I was not surprised when it was discovered that she was truth. I don't know if that was intended to be that way. I don't think it was. I think it was. I think the audience is not supposed to believe that either.
I agree with you, but I also think that Andy doesn't necessarily believe him, but wants to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Is what we get.
And also, he just feels guilty. Right. It's very much a um, you're having a bad time and we were friends once. So even though I am very angry with you and do not want to be part of your life, I am willing to do this for you because that is what you should do in this situation. Frankly, Gary does it because he is a good person, and that screws him on some level.
And it's also nice to know that out of his three friends, the only person that really has to check. I'm sorry. I also think that Steven has to, but they check with their counterparts, like their partners. Which for Peter, he's married, so that's like full. He has full core. I need to go away with the boys for the weekend to drink. Is that okay, honey? Like that is something you have to do.
Hmm.
And the fact that no matter how many times he says her name, Gary doesn't remember who she is or what her name is.
Yeah,
Like constantly reinforced. Like I am the only important thing here, and you all exist because I allow you to exist.
it was something I didn't notice at first, but as the movie went on, I noticed was that his memory is perfect up until they leave high school. He knows everything about his friends, about where they live and what's going on with them, and where their intended careers were going. Their lives after that, he has not only zero memory, but almost refuses to keep that information.
And they comment on like selective memory throughout the course of the movie.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But like and at first I was like, is that why he was in therapy? Did he have brain damage
Mhm.
functionally? But it's like no, it's very clear that he just doesn't care.
No, that's it. I don't think I have anything else for the first part. I just wanted to definitely touch on the car piece and the police officer, and
No, that
like
was
the
smart.
plate still being in Peter's name.
Right. So, so bad. So the group encounters Oliver's sister Sam, who Gary and Stephen fought over in school. In the fourth pub they go to, Gary goes to the toilet, and when he gets into a fight with a teenager and knocks his head off, exposing him as an android. As Gary's friends find him in the bathroom, they encounter several other androids and fight them off. They realize the town has been replaced by androids, whom they dub blanks. So we have the first four pubs. And I have to admit, I mentioned before that a lot of pubs have been bought out by chains. So the gag of them going into the first two pubs and they have identical interiors, I genuinely liked.
Oh, I love though. Before we go into the fourth War Popper, is the third club did remember who he was, and he's banned for life and kick him out.
Right.
Oh, and okay. Did you notice in each single pub the number of the pub is in the pub somehow?
No, I didn't know that.
Because I want to say in the second pub it's literally like a 2 on the thing. In the third pub, the
Two-headed
shot
dog.
of 3 half-drunk beers are there. They has to form a fourth beer,
Oh.
and they do that consistently throughout all the pubs.
Oh, I actually didn't notice that. That's actually pretty cool.
Like so many little things that Wright has in here, fucking phenomenal.
Right. And I mean, the first two pubs, the confidence to do pretty much the exact same joke twice in a row, uh, mainly works because all of the actors know exactly how to pitch the responses and the pacing of those two scenes because they're not like quick. You know, it's about 4 or 5 minutes each scene. So like you spend a bit of time in those first two pubs, and then the pubs get a little faster, and so we hit the fourth pub. Um, so like I was like, oh, they're actually spending a moment on. It's the first one, like you have to establish it, and then the second one is the payoff. But they still spent a bit of time in the second pub. And I was surprised by it, but it's because of the watching Gary go through the exact same motions and get shot down in the exact same way again is both funny because Simon Pegg plays it off perfectly of like, I don't understand why this keeps happening, but also plays into the larger setup we've had of Gary just doesn't acknowledge things that don't exist for him. As this doesn't sink in. So clearly that last one just didn't happen. So this one will happen the way I think it will, and it also doesn't happen the way I think it will.
And another bit about the last names is when Sam shows up, everyone else stands for Sam, except for the king who doesn't stand,
Oh,
which
yeah, I
is
did notice
name
that.
related and also then joke related by like the shout back to God, I forgot the name of the musical now. But so you have all of that there. So there's like constant layers playing on each other that are easy to miss, which is why we said it before, but you always have to keep watching a Wright film.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those things that like if you like the our theory and stuff, I wasn't getting until surprisingly late in the film, frankly. But as we're talking through, and also as I was remembering back, you're right. There are these little nods that can be seen as just well, it's just you stand when a lady comes in, kind of stuff, slightly antiquated things. Um, but now that you put it all together, it's like yeah, no, it's always we follow Gary because he's the king,
Mm-hmm.
and even though the characters themselves are straight up saying, "Why are we doing this?" Particularly Andy. Andy's like, "I don't even know why I'm doing this, right? I'm gonna have water." And before by the third pub, there's like, maybe we just need to stop. Maybe just call this off. But they're still finding themselves drawn to Gary, and you're right. It's fascinating because we as the audience are going, "Yeah, no, you should just go. This is not good for anybody, particularly for Gary."
Oh,
But you can't help it because he's the king.
and the fourth pub. Oh,
Right.
oh, that's where it all breaks down. I could
So
have watched them in another pub before this happened. Is how much fun I was
right.
having just for this part of the movie.
No, totally. But what the thing I find the most interesting is that before he actually attacks a teenager, which is a separate moment of weirdness, um, he sees the teenagers. Look like they're all having a good time. He's frustrated with his friends, and so he genuinely thinks, as a 40-ish-year-old man, that he could just hang out with a bunch of teenagers and keep drinking, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do.
This is before he was drinking because we saw these same teens walk by him on the street, and he was like, "Hey, fellow teens, I too am
Oh, true,
now
yeah.
drinking."
It's like he genuinely can't think of himself as not being a teenager.
Uh, and then to start the fight, the teen didn't start the fight and tried to
No.
de-escalate multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah, Gary's the asshole here. He definitely, which is where I noticed the kind of twist of the drink culture thing. Like before then, there was a bit of it's a bit awkward. One guy doesn't like to drink, um, but it could have been all chalked up to the awkwardness of just you're a 40-year-old man and you can't do this like you could when you were younger. But at this point in time, it's the no. Gary's genuinely drunk and is becoming a violent drunk, and take the sci-fi component out of this for a moment. A grown ass man walked into a toilet, tried to hit up a teenager to go drinking, and then started a fight with that same teenager. Gary is not a well man.
No. So, ah,
But then we get the when we get the fight in the toilet, and absolutely, even though I love the action Hot Fuzz, has the best fight scenes of the trilogy, just hands down.
well, this will be a shout out for when we cover Scott Pilgrim. The people in Scott Pilgrim had like 2 months worth of fight training with Jackie Chan's like fighting crew,
Oh wow,
coordination crew. So I'm thinking Edgar Wright took some of that knowledge and applied it here. And that is why
probably,
this fight scene is so amazing.
and it's there's actually during the fight scene, a large chunk of it is what appears to be one take. I have since learned that a lot of these fight scenes that are done in one take are actually done in lots and lots of takes. They're just stitched together in a way that looks like it's one take. But still, it is extremely impressive, especially because you mentioned Jackie Chan. That actually clicks a piece in for me because there is a bit of slapstick during this fight because of all of the blue liquid on the floor,
Yeah.
of people sliding around and slipping and whatnot. And so like there's actually physical comedy, which is very much a Jackie Chan action staple.
And I like the fact that it's blue, but also the fact that it's blue means it is less graphic than if it had been
Mhm.
red, like blood. People would have been
Right.
like really freaked out probably by the sheer amount of it that you see throughout the course of the film and them covered in red versus
Right.
blue.
Yeah, it was a moment of like because Shaun of the Dead is pretty bloody, but if you changed the blue to red, this would be even gorier. So I think it was a bit of like let's because these are robots and because we can this is blue blood, we can push the physical horror without it tipping over into actual graphic goriness. And so I could tell like it felt like Wright was going, okay, because of all of these, maybe we've reframed everything, we could just shower people in this blue stuff.
Oh, and the fight scene, you also get the fact that Peter constantly running from all the fights,
Yes.
which is going to be character arc for that character. And okay, if I'm assuming they went for a mass production model over quality robots to make the film as funny as it is, because these guys break super easy.
Well, this is something I was going to talk about in the next chunk, but I can talk about it here too. Is that uh, this movie has what I have often called the thousand ninjas problem, which is that when Gary's fighting one robot, it's a challenging fight, and when it's roughly equal, it's a long fight scene, but they do ultimately break down. As the fights continue through the movie, the more robots that are around, the easier individual ones are to dispatch. So if you fight one ninja, that ninja is an amazing master of martial arts. You fight 1,000 ninjas, you can flick them and they explode.
Same thing happens though in RPGs all the time.
Totally.
It's all about the level, and so for usually singular fights, it's a big bad with maybe like level 10 compared to when you're fighting the minions like level 0.5.
Right. And certainly in RPG standards, it's like they look exactly the same, but the level 10 guy and the level 0.5 guy depending when you encounter them in the scenario is how powerful they are.
Yeah. Some of them, though, you can tell, which we haven't gotten to that one yet. Which at least I don't think so. It'll be the twins. I want to talk about twins when we get the twins, but we're not
We'll
the
get there,
twins.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
And okay. Now, having seen more and more toilet fight scenes, for instance, this and then Henry Cavill versus Tom Cruise, I'm not a fan of toilet fight scenes, Eddie, because it's where people go and you discard waste. So even if you win the fight, you're bloody, you're like covered in who knows what. You need to immediately go and have that disinfected. Who knows what these guys will get if they'd made it past this night?
Are you saying that the scene of James Bond at the beginning of Casino Royale is just unsanitary and that Bond should have cleaned himself up before going anywhere?
Yes, I'm saying it about him. I'm saying it about Ethan Hunt when he fights Henry Cavill. So many things. That's where the shotgun arms come from, is in the toilet. And now we get like Frost body dropping one of the guys, breaking him in half. And they're completely sweaty. They've been beat up, covered in stuff, and disgusting. That's it. That's
Mhm.
my bathroom rant. I'm done. Although I want one more piece.
Yep.
It is funny that they hit the hand dryer machine to cover the noise of the fight.
Yes. Yes. It's like that was an inspired moment that makes no goddamn sense, but love it. All right. So Gary urges them to continue the pub crawl to avoid suspicion. The group bumps into Sam once more, and she, Gary, and Stephen fight blank versions of Sam's childhood friends known as the twins. She tags along with them, and Stephen is told by Basil, a local conspiracy theorist who has not yet been replaced by a blank, that the blanks are trying to build a gigantic conglomerate. Any humans refusing will be replaced by identical simulants. The blanks attempt to convince humans to join their simulation. Unwilling to lose their humanity and finding out that both Oliver and their old school teacher, Mr. Shepard, have been replaced, the group fights a bar full of blanks. So, Pub 5. I swear, the first thing I thought was, oh, hey, it's Brian from Space.
They have everybody. And if we go back to the landlady when they first show up, it's the original landlady from Space. Or
Yes,
the pub
yes, yeah.
owner. Or the pub owner from the other one. So constantly there.
I love that. But right before this is also because right after the fight, but in this chunk, um, the conversation of what to call them
Oh
and
god.
the robot means slave gag just is genuinely funny because it is a bit of science fiction nerdity that somehow everyone in this town knows. And you realize the reason why everyone in this town knows it is because they've all been replaced by replicants.
Oh, it's so good. Um, okay. Sam's friends are twins.
Right.
I need to ask you, Eddie, do you find twins to be creepy?
Uh I find the way twins are portrayed in media to be creepy. I have known people who are twins, and I don't inherently find them creepy. But uh, certainly when I had some friends of mine who were twins, and they did learn how to talk in unison, and that pissed me the fuck off because they would do the "What's wrong? We're not doing anything wrong," and I'm just like, "God damn it, stop that!"
So, yes, the portrayal of twins in media is frequently creepy, or on the other hand, where they wanted to be sexy. But here, for Wright and Peg, it's always creepy because we get like the shout back to Space, where when they first show up, they open the closet, there are a pair of twins in there that jump out at them. I want to say
Mhm.
there's other twins gags, and these twins are equally creepy, but the creep factor is escalated because they're robots or blanks, as they call them here. And rather than taking arms to fight Eddie, she takes her sister's legs. So a four-legged blank attacks him.
Yes, yes, and she still has the tights on the legs too, which is hilarious. But
Oh,
the one thing I actually the other small piece I like about that scene is Sam's chatting with them and trying to kind of talk with them, and they're responding, and they're very clearly talking in sync and trying to interrogate her to get information about. their invasion, right? So we as the audience know pretty clear what's happening here. And Sam is just acting like her childhood friends talking in sync is a perfectly normal thing that happens all the time. And it's and what I like about it is we it's the last time we saw Sam, we kind of glossed over this. Is that Gary's big memory of Sam is that they had sex in the disabled once, and so now that's all he thinks of her as. And so she correctly points out that is seriously not okay. And she believes because she's like, I was basically sexually assaulted and I'm going to go because this is fucking terrible. Um, so at this point, what little we've seen of Sam is that she is the adult in the room and she refuses to become the object of consequence. I mean, because Stephen is just as much near as an object as Gary is, just not, on a less obvious level. He still sees her as the one that got away in a lot of ways, and so he still objectifies her on that level. And Sam is making a lot of very logical responses to these bunch of immature men, and is like, "I'm just going to leave the situation." And also like, um, uh, I think it's no, it's not. I remember which one's her brother.
Oh man.
Oh yeah, oh man, yeah. And he's like, "Hey, stop talking about my sister that way." Uh, uh, it becomes a bit whiny, but it starts off as like, "No, seriously, that's not okay." And so Sam is kind of centered as this person who is very sensible and is probably going to be able to kind of actually solve problems. And then we move to this scene where she's clearly not seeing the obvious problem in front of her, which shows that she's also just as willing to push away things that she doesn't want to engage with as everybody, all of the characters in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And also, sorry, slightly before this though, we potentially have O Man replaced, which no one knows at this point in time,
Mhm.
because his interactions are slightly different, but he doesn't seem to care as much when Gary or anyone else goes after his sister, or they call him O Man. How before it bothered him because he had like that whole thing lazily removed. So that is a nice thing that's there, but you also get the fact that Gary notices a change in him as they're going through this, because he
Mhm.
points out that like by last time you'd passed out or you'd been gone, and I like the new you. So that's already inferring he knows something is up with him, but doesn't do anything because it goes along with what he wants to do in his plan.
Right. Andy's the only one who is genuinely suspicious.
And then we also go to the mermaid bar where we
Right.
get the entire like full back drop down of what's going on from Basil. Because I don't think we're gonna, because that happens around here.
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's in the second chunk.
Because Sam is still with them, so it happens before the attack.
Right. Attack!
And we get the actor that plays the doctor, the first doctor.
And also in Game of Thrones, he again very versatile actor that we've seen a lot of in the past few seasons for some reason.
And it is a nice building of the story as it progresses through all these different beats. And it is just fascinating how well they did it. And you get 12 pubs, and as you mentioned before, each one starts to go a little bit faster during the middle portion here because the location isn't as important as the events that happen, and there aren't like long events or very succinct events occur.
Right. The other thing I like about the Basil scene is that uh everything leading up to the first three pubs, people were acting weird, and we were able to chalk it up to Gary is being weird and making a lot of assumptions about the world, and so people are like don't want to engage with Gary, and so they're acting weird because he's not living in the 90s anymore, and everybody else has moved on. Then we find out that alien invader robots are on the table, and so all the people acting weird gets reframed as well. They're all robots, and then we see Basil, and it's like, oh well, you were ignoring us because you were trying to avoid the rising. No, you were just being assholes. I didn't want to talk to you because you didn't recognize us the first thing. No, I recognized you. I just want to talk to you. And so the fact that the thing we thought the first three times was still actually also on the table, like these both things can be true, was actually pretty funny.
Oh, and his drug dealer in the bar. I don't know if you
Yes.
watched all of Space, but he's also from Space.
Okay.
He was a bike messenger in that whenever he heard music, he'd start like to dance to it. Freaking hilarious every time. Um, so it's always nice to see him too.
Yes. And then the whole conversation of him being one of the few humans left, and it's like we're happy. We want to be here. You know, everything's going well. Don't fuck this up for us. Um, Again, we're starting to kind of it starts to shift a little bit, and then we get the Mr. Shepard scene, which again, you can hear more clearly here Brosnan's Irish accent kind of coming out. But he's trying to be the oh no, you know, let's talk, just like we did in the old days. And so it's fascinating because Mr. Shepard has a space in Gary's head as being from 1990 and someone he respected, he actually gets pretty far in convincing Gary because he fits into that slot in Gary's head of people I will acknowledge and recognize. And then it just goes a step too far, and then light shoots out of their face. It just goes
But
completely opposite.
it's not Gary that does that or saves him. It's Andy.
Right,
Because
right.
that's when
Andy's the
he
one who says, "No, that's
realizes,
not good." Right,
well, Andy realizes that they've taken O-Man and literally cracks his skull open. Where like the light, everything pours out. And that's when like the shit gets real and everyone else really understands what's happening.
yeah, and that's the other thing is like, they he breaks oh man's head open and say, "Okay, that character be written out now." No, he stays with a shattered head for the rest of the movie. And so the special effects of that is like, "No, I'm just gonna have a half a head for next 40 minutes." And it's just like, "Okay."
And their attack method to grab you by the head didn't make
Right,
a lot of sense at first until you really get up to about here and you start seeing what it's for. To sort of hold you in place so they can do their light trick.
right.
Oh,
Yes. Um, uh, uh, oh, yeah, we also forgot to mention, like, this is the point where Andy decides to start drinking. And what's interesting is that as Gary gets more drunk, he becomes less violent and more kind of soppy and emotional and terrified. Andy becomes more aggressive, but he's not an out of control violent drunk. And so watching the different drinking patterns, and of course, briefly we think, oh man, has a different drinking pattern. Turns out he's just been replaced. But like so, watching the different kinds of drunk they get as people, and so we see again, like Andy's becoming more of the knight. He's like, I'm going to start physically defending people now, and he in this second fight scene just tears the place up. He is very clearly the MVP of this second big fight scene.
I think in one of the interviews, Wright saying was that he was watching. I want to say it was a Jackie Chan movie, like The Drunken Master, and his thought was the more they drink, the better their fighting skills get.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can see that again. Jackie Chan reference that makes sense.
And like for Gary, though, it's his thing that he can fight, but he's less concerned about the fight. He's more concerned about getting the pint at that pub. Even here,
Right,
where Sam, who he has some interest in, is in danger, he's at the bar with like a beer and he goes, "Fuck, I got to go do something." And
right,
goes to sort of help her, but keeps his beer the whole time until he finishes it.
and that's when I started to wonder because the way Gary starts to talk about the drinks from this point feels more like a quest.
Yeah.
And he'd been calling it a quest before, but it's kind of half jokingly. But the fact is that I need to do this. I will literally push aside everything I think matters to me because I need to do this. I was like, oh, is this actually a proper Arthurian quest? And the way they start to shoot the pints, they're now more in the foreground. Sometimes they're well lit. There's very kind of Cup of Christ from the Indiana Jones movies, way they're kind of framed on screen. They get more and more prominence and more of a mythological component. Whereas, of course, if you look at the first few ones, They go and take a drink and leave, but then the beers get more and more foregrounded as you go through the pubs.
Yeah. So, like, when they I'll take a step back, but when they encounter Brian from Spaced as the
Mhm.
bartender, when they walk in, he repeats back to them all the things they said to the first 2 or 3 bartenders about this beer that's out front
Right.
for them to drink.
Mhm.
So they'd been like processing what they're doing up to this point and then giving it back to them and more, as you said, highlighting that and making it part of it.
Right, but also, establishing that Gary was talking up these beers as if they were amazing, and they're just chain pubs. Who the fuck cares? But then you're right. When you get there, it's like now the myth starts to take over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fascinating how there are these two movie genres happening, and then once again, there's kind of a third one just kind of shoved underneath.
So where would you put the Stepford Wives riff that we're getting in this?
That was the other thing is like I was debating when I was taking my notes of is this Invasion of Body Snatchers or is this Stepford Wives? And I realized they're both kinds of the same, slightly larger genre.
Yeah.
So I mean, because Invasion of Body Snatchers, Stepford Wives, one of the movies inspired the other. I don't remember the order it is. Um, but certainly at this point, I was like, oh, it's very Stepford Wives, where everyone's talking in a very blank face, everyone's smiling, everyone's happy. But also, I mean, to go back to another touch point we talked about before, a bit of early WandaVision too, right? That
Mhm.
sense of this is too good to be true. But instead of being an idealized suburbia, although this is a suburb, it's idealized through the lens of British men of a certain age, right? And again, like the idea of this is a good thing, just kind of give in. And it's usually that's the okay. If an alien force is invading, telling you everything we find, just relax and take it. That's usually bad. But given that the protagonist, well,
Oh
particularly
god.
Gary, their stakes are so low and petty, you kind of wonder if maybe the aliens don't have a point for a minute here, you know?
I think if anyone tells you to relax and take it, you should really reevaluate the situation that you're in. Just
Sure,
as a general statement.
sure. No, I agree. But because of Gary's adolescence viewpoint, when someone seems to be talking sense, there's a natural inclination to kind of, that's how authoritarianism works, right? It's there's natural inclination to kind of go, okay, well, maybe they're making a good point, and then say, no, wait, that's not a good point, and it's only because of Gary's reluctance to give up his youth that it just bounces off of him. Frankly, the only reason why it almost got through is because specifically that Mr. Shepard was there.
Hmm. So good.
Uh, Gary lets Sam escape Newton Haven by herself. Pete gets captured after attacking the blank that has replaced his childhood bully. And when Andy and Steven try to escape, Gary ditches them to finish the Golden Mile alone. Andy and Steven chase after Gary, as does the rest of Newton Haven, as Steven is captured. In the world's end, Andy confronts Gary and reveals that his marriage is troubled, while Gary reveals a recent suicide attempt. Andy tries to stop Gary from drawing his final pint, but Gary clings to completing the mile as he believes that it's all he has. And this is where shit gets dark.
Just now?
Well, the and that's fair, right? Okay, but like a lot of the darkness was leavened with humor up to this point, and this is the part where the humor doesn't entirely leave, but certainly falls into the background a bit. Although I did notice you mentioned look for this the jumping over fences gag returned,
Yep.
and last time he effortlessly went through three, and this time couldn't even do one.
and
And like that's really funny. That is a great use of a running joke.
and before now, I think there was also a slip scene where he sort of slips how he did in the other two movies too. So there's some like repeat beats, which is super cool.
Which I loved.
And I
Um,
love the fact that when they find out he let Sam escape in the only car, they all go, "What the fuck? We all could have
right,
left together."
right. It's because Gary's now, and I mean, this part where I was a little confused about Gary's motivation, but I think in his head he was telling himself, "I have to save this woman that I care about, and that's the right thing." But I think subconsciously what's happening is Gary's like, Sam is trying to stop me from doing this thing I want to finish. She does not follow my lead blindly as other people do, so I need to remove her from the situation.
Mhm.
So it did take me a minute to get there, but once I got there, it's like, okay, no, this is still Gary manipulating people to get what he wants, which is what he's been doing the whole movie.
And when they're in that little clubhouse together, we get more insight to what a total dick Gary is, as is like
Mhm.
have to prove they're not blanks, and everyone shows off a wound that Gary gave them.
Yes. Right.
Like, oh,
It was, and hilariously, it's like it's also a callback to a zombie movie trope of everyone, because it's the
yep,
opposite, right? It's the, show you're not scarred, show you're not injured by the zombie. This one, show you are injured to prove you're not a blank. And you're right, yeah, it's the on this. I got this wound because of you. I got this wound because of you. Got this wound because of you. And then Andy is like, I could show you this one or this one or this one or this one. And it's just like, you're a really bad friend, Gary.
and he
But
refuses to show them like his wrist where supposedly he has a wound at, so his arm where he had to expose his wrist.
right,
Which, if you didn't already put it together, now like huge bells should be ringing in your head at this point.
right, and again, because the way the movie's paced, the wrong alarm bell ends up ringing because it's the, oh, has Gary been replaced? And again, like, that was where my thought was processed initially, was like, Gary's now suddenly caring less about the Golden Mile and more about allegedly his friends. He let Sam get away. He wants to make sure his friends are okay. Now he won't show his arm. Maybe Gary's been replaced by a blank. And that's but it turns out the reason why he won't show his arm is because he still has his hospital bans for when he was put into the hospital because he had a suicide attempt.
Yep. Ugh. Instead, he just bangs his head against a wooden pole.
Right. Because that somehow proves things. And it does. They're like, oh, it's Gary.
Ugh. Oh, I, I, I'm, I am torn and frustrated with Nick Frost's character because when Gary ditches him to then still go after him again in that situation, and to be forced to run after him as he finishes a beer and constantly moving towards like his one goal, but he won't let him go.
Right. So, in previous movies, specifically Shaun of the Dead, I'm thinking of, Nick Frost's character is the steadfast friend. It's like, I will go through heaven and hell. I will do anything for you because you're my best friend. Even though I'm a bit of a fuck up, my loyalty is my one redeeming value. I read this as the toxic counterpoint to that.
Mm.
When it's the, I am your friend, I shouldn't be doing this. As a friend, I should probably take care of myself and vacate the situation. But because I feel toxically loyal to you, I will continue to endanger myself and allow you to keep doing the things that you want to do. I will enable you. So now we have Andy's become an enabler, frankly,
Yeah.
and uh, I think because it comes on the heels of the scene of, here's all of the things that all the wounds that he got from Gary. In other cases, because it was Gary playing a prank or just being a jerk, but all the ones that Andy talks about are protecting Gary in some way. So again, he's like you said, his last name is Knightley. He's a knight, so he protects his king. And so for me, Andy's become more of an archetype, but also a lot of the character changes in the movie can be chalked to the fact is they're all drunk. And so it's the, he's not thinking straight. I need to protect Gary because when I remember being drunk, and when I'm drunk, this is what I do when I'm drunk. Uh, but then when we have that, and this is the scene where I said the two of them in the world's ends, when Gary reveals that he committed suicide and Andy revealed that his life's falling apart. That was the moment where I said they're genuinely good actors. But also, that revealed to me Andy's doing it because he doesn't have anything else in his life right now. And Gary reveals that he has so little in his life that he wanted to end it.
So It's not that Gary reveals that though. It's when they're like in a
It's implied,
confrontation,
I should say.
and then when Andy like sort of is in wrestling with him, we see the bandages. So I think it's almost more powerful given the fact that Gary didn't say that like
Fair,
at
fair.
all, and Andy pieces it all together. But Gary comments after you've pieced it together is that they could have been legendary, but now he's at a place where there are people that tell him when to go to bed,
Yeah.
and how shattered his life is by that, and all that
Mhm.
wasted potential.
Right, right. Um, that's a good shout. Because you're right. It at no point does the movie say that, but it shows you that it's classic show don't tell. Um, and also, even though Nick Frost explaining what happens, how he feels about his wedding ring, which had never been even mentioned up to this point, suddenly becomes extremely important to him because he's one of the few people that didn't mention having to talk to his wife to get permission. But then when you hear that part, it's like again, it's like a good mystery. All of these click oh, that's why, and this all makes sense. The other scenes of the men talking to their spouses and that being a notable omission for Andy, but then him having a wedding ring much later, it's like okay, now I see why those pieces are put together the way they are. So it's still showing a lot more than it's telling. Uh,
And
but
when he retrieves it from the mermaid,
right, I punched a robot's belly, got my wedding ring back. Um,
oh god,
but even then, like we 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 skipped over a little bit, but like they talk about the marmalade sandwich with the three young girls that they remember idolizing when they were kids, and they start seducing them in the one of the pubs that became a nightclub because that happens. Um, and Andy was one of the people that was also being seduced because at that point in time, it was Stephen, Gary, and Andy were all firmly into trying to reclaim their childhood. Andy and Stephen along had fallen into Gary's wake, if you will. Like this is what we could do. We could be like we were, even better than we were back then. But
you
now,
mean
but
Peter,
Andy
right?
did,
Because
but or sorry, no, you're right. It's Peter. Andy didn't do that. I'm sorry.
no,
Because
Steven didn't do it because Steven was in the room with Basil.
oh no, no,
Up
no, you're
to
right. See, I admit, I'm outside of Gary and Andy, admittedly, the other characters get a little muddled in my head. So that's my fault. You're right. No, but Stephen was talking to Basil. It was Peter because Peter's following along with Gary because that's his role. And Andy does start to get along, but he's the only one's like maybe I shouldn't do this. But then she sucks the wedding ring off his finger, and that's where that goes on. And that actually, as opposed to push to suction over, that actually pisses Andy off. And so I bring it up because he fights to get his wedding ring back, and then he talks to Gary. And the way I read that scene is again, it's not stated, but the way Andy talks about his family is that he is someone who expresses love by protecting people. And when he couldn't do that for Gary anymore, he changed that focus onto his family and probably went too far, just like he did with Gary, and ended up pushing them away. But that's just how Andy is. He goes 110% for the people he loves, and that sometimes is too much, and sometimes also will overlook their flaws in his need to protect them.
Mhm.
So
And
go ahead.
I was just going to mention that when the couple times that he references his wife and his family during the movie, he references them in the past tense throughout the whole movie.
Mhm.
Which, if you're not paying attention, it doesn't matter or anything. But when you get to this point, all of that just sort of collides right here.
Right.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, and then after all that, Gary still can't let the Golden Mile go. He still goes for a drink, which is interesting because the pairing at this point, this is the point where I realized, yes, this is Arthurian myth. The way they like the world's end is in shadow, except for the light is on the bar under the pint glass. It's like super clear, right? What's happening here? Um, But for me, as someone who's lived with an alcoholic family, the pairing of alcoholic addiction with the obsessive need for the quest, because one thing that a little bit I remember from the Arthurian romances is that questing was not a it was a noble thing, but also it was kind of a mania. You couldn't not be on the quest once you started. And so pairing those things was particularly powerful for me because sometimes I've not suffered from addiction, but I've seen family members suffer from addiction, and I know that it's like for them is that they can't stop it. They can't not do that. And so seeing Gary be like, "Nope, I understand that. I know how much I've ruined your lives. I'm still gonna take a drink because I have to, because I must, because I cannot do otherwise." Was such a strong moment. And then it turns into an elevator, a secret elevator. It's like the high point of this dramatic moment, and it becomes science fiction bullshit just out of nowhere is amazing.
It's almost like a Bond villain lair. Is that what we're gonna go
Yes.
for?
Yes, and that was I skipped it over, but, like, yeah, having another Bond actor playing another Bond villain, but secretly being an entrance to the actual Bond villain, and it's like, okay, I love seeing these tropes and gags across movies. So good. Uh, Anything else before I go into the secret lair?
Good to go.
So, as I mentioned, Gary pulls a lever. The floor lowers into a hidden chamber. A disembodied alien entity known as the Network tells Gary and Andy that the blank invasion is the first step to humanity joining a galactic community. Network offers Gary eternal youth if he becomes a blank, but he refuses. Along with Andy and Steven, who have survived, Gary calls out the tyranny in the Network's plan and demands that humanity be left to its own devices. The Network, exasperated, agrees to abandon the invasion. Sam rescues Gary, Andy, and Steven as the town is destroyed. They're unable to outrun the pulse triggered by the departure of the network, which deactivates Sam's car. Uh, and so there's another trope we talked about before where a lot of these films, they will use lines in the beginning in the much more mundane part of the movie and then use the exact same lines in a very different case here. And so way back when they did the chain pub gag, they mentioned about they use Starbuck as a verb. Stop Starbucking us. Uh, and then they now apply that to the network, and it's such a great moment uh, um, in the sense of the analogy of these chain pubs to turning that and applying it to people. There's a great kind of sci-fi conceit that worked really well with the mundanity of the line.
And it's nice that it goes back to the innate struggle of being human. Like they're saying, we want to give you order and calm and peace, and humans innately say, "Fuck that! We don't want anyone to tell us what to do."
Right. Like this is straight up a Star Trek argument, you know? And it's even framed like a movie from Undiscovered Country or from a classic Star Trek episode where like, the glowing voice is above you and they're talking down to you and you're trying to plead about their ability, except for their argument boils down to it's our human right to be fucking idiots, and we're gonna be the biggest fucking idiots you've ever seen.
Yep. But then they go back with a bit of logic that so how many people willingly converted, or like how many people are still human, and you get 3 people out of an entire town.
But it was Andy that pointed that part out, I will note. Gary is the one who was just like, "No, I'm gonna knock this place down," and he's become just belligerent drunk. And Andy's like, "Now wait a minute, how many people actually?" But also Andy is fully in protect Gary mode too.
Well, we could also then, if it's Andy that did it, say that what were their professions? Andy turned out to be a lawyer, and so he's effectively lawyering an
True.
alien sentient being. Did you recognize the voice of the alien?
No, I didn't.
Bill Nye, the father from yeah.
Nice, nice. That was the stepdad from Shaun of the Dead. Nice.
So it was
Uh, and what's interesting is, so the movie presents a choice that at first glance you think Gary should accept, but then after your conclusion you realize it was never a good choice when it says you could be young again, right? And based on the movie's been structured, you would think Gary would go for that because it's all about reliving his youth. But when he says, "Fuck no," he very easily passes it over. And again, just note that they actually use the same actors playing the young people as blanks. It was a nice little touch. So you see young Gary and old Gary look at each other, and Gary very easily throws it away. And for a half second, I was like, "That doesn't make sense." And I realized, no, Gary's not doesn't want to be young again. Gary wants his potential back. And being young in the network, you have zero potential. That is not what he
Yeah.
wants.
I also would think part of that realization comes from this talk that he and Frost had upstairs before they came down here
Mhm.
to give him a better idea of what he had and lost with his friends by not going with them in their life to make that potential even more important.
Mhm. Right. And again, Fight with Network, there's another parallel line because uh, Andy early on, I think twice, made the comment of it's pointless arguing with you. And the network makes the same line. But when you mentions that it's the same guys who played Stepdad, I realized also there's a parallel line from Shaun of the Dead, where he also once said to Shaun, it's pointless arguing with you.
This is
I missed that the first time around. That's really clever.
so many of these are just so consistently watchable to pick up all these small snippets that occur throughout the three of them.
Yeah. And then just the sheer fun of them talking the alien out of it, and it's like, so you're not doing anything? Yeah, fuck it. It's just hilarious. I don't know why. So yeah, fuck it.
Oh. Oh, and this is when the replaced O-Man's head gets cracked as a network pulls out. So he had lost like the top part of his head again.
Yep.
Because they
Right.
brought back another version that was just normal O-Man.
Right. Right. And it's I don't know. I mean, it's so clearly the this is where we talked the alien out of the thing. But again, like the moment is the okay, we've talked him out, we're good. And then oh shit, no, the place is gonna explode. Which again feels at the moment like the typical arbitrarily inflating stakes. It's like, of course, the place has to explode now that we've shut it down because that's what happens in these kinds of movies. And so it's like, no, we have to go. We take the car, and then they don't quite outrace it.
Yeah. But then we get the shot back to the hill where they get to sit and watch the town burn.
Hmm.
And as a parallel to the start of the movie where Gary was the only one still awake watching over the town. Which, funnily enough, if you're paying attention, and I think Basil references it, but you can see a falling star at the start of the movie is where all this
Oh
kicks off from.
yeah, oh yeah, I did miss that.
And then Basil mentions it, but it's quick when he mentions it. So it's easy to miss again.
You're right. Actually, that was a piece that I had forgotten, but you're absolutely right. Is that the movie that because of through Basil, the movie parallels that the city also got stuck in 1990 because that's when the network landed. And so uh, it's implied that Gary went back because he was drawn to that, but really it's just much more the parallelism. Like Gary also got stuck there, but because the only reason why he escaped actual conversion is because he left and all their friends left town.
Yeah.
But so he's mentally stuck there, where everyone else is actually physically stuck in 1990.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. Last bit.
Yep.
So sometime later, Andy relates that the pulse triggered a worldwide blackout that destroyed all electrical power on Earth, sending humanity back to the Dark Ages. The remaining blanks reactivated a few weeks later, and although they're now independent from the network, they are mistrusted and shunned by most of the surviving humans. Andy's marriage has recovered. Steve is in a relationship with Sam, and a stimulant version of Peter and Oliver have picked up where their human versions left off. In the ruins of Newton Haven, a now sober Gary enters a pub with the blank versions of his younger friends and orders water. When the bartender refuses to serve blanks, Gary leads his friends into a brawl with Gary declaring himself the king. So once again, another ending where it's like, huh, okay. Uh, but I do have to say, like, compared to the Shaun the Dead one, where I think we were both kind of like meh on that ending. Um, this one feels a lot better to me because it's the same idea, right? It's like these people live on. But in this case, it's hilariously the apocalypse was the point of Shaun of the Dead, and it ends with something relatively close to normal. This is the opposite, where it's like, nope, it's just the world has ended. Literally, it was in the title of the movie. Why are you surprised? So now it's a post-apocalyptic movie. Um, but how humans relate to blanks feels it's still satirical, but it feels less jarringly satirical than the Shaun of the Dead ending to me.
Well, part of it for me is that I stated up front, I don't like zombie films. And I know this ending feels zombie esque, but it's the fact that the blanks are, I'll say, sentient again and more or less representations of their previous personalities.
Right.
So they're just now like a different classification of people that are running around with them
Right.
versus a servant class that is not has like the full level of sentience that are forced to do things.
Right. Mm.
So it's forcing them, also being the Dark Ages, to have more of a community for them to be able to survive at all.
Mhm.
So I think that resonates better with me than what the Shaun of the Dead ending did.
I agree. I agree. And also, this is the actual Cornetto appears very briefly. Um, Pretty clearly shoehorned in, but
It was
in a
great
way
for
that's even
sci-fi,
funnier.
Eddie.
I do like the I don't even miss processed food anymore. And then the way he looked at that Cornetto wrapper, it's like he clearly does. I mean, like it was a good gag, but also like I just think it was the whole Cornetto trilogy thing being a thing was a joke anyway. So making the actual inclusion of the final Cornetto itself kind of a lame joke made sense to me.
But you have to tell the kids that processed food sucks because they won't have processed food.
Right, right, and that's another thing I liked is that Andy's still a protector even at the end of the world. The way the movie kind of ends is that all of them are now actually their idealized selves. The end of the world has actually made them the people that they always wanted to be. And in the day, Andy wants to protect and teach people, and he's now doing that. Steven actually has a relationship with Sam, which is the thing he's always wanted, which is Andy's marriage is recovered too, which is good. And then Oh Man is still selling houses, even though he's a robot with half a head. You know,
And Peter doesn't seem to have changed at all, which was one of the points they made, like,
Peter is still there,
which is
but
just weird.
Peter. Well, I mean, a there's a lot of characters here, and there's only so many you can give arcs to. Uh, but B, Peter's idealized form was to be a follower, so he still got that. He got some catharsis with the bully thing, but that was also kind of shoehorned in my opinion. We didn't
Well,
really talk
that
about that
led to
much
his
because
his death and conversion.
right.
So I don't know if I would. I personally don't think I could call, like, if that is catharsis where you have to die for it to be there. I understand he gets to come back in another body uploaded, but
Right, right. I mean,
it feels off.
he's from as far as the movie is concerned, he is not really dead. He still exists. But you're right. There's a dark undercurrent to it. Like two of these characters are just dead.
Which is a joke they made, by the way, for when Gary made something like, "We're the Five Musketeers,"
Right.
and they go, "It's three Musketeers." He said, "Well, you should have five, so that way, if two of them get killed, you still have three."
Oh, you're right. Oh, I didn't put it together.
So
Oh,
it's
oh,
like
that's
constant little things are just building
wow.
up to.
Nice. Um, and then the Arthurian at the very end, the Arthurian myth becomes explicitly literal as Gary draws a sword to make it super goddamn clear in case you missed it the rest of the movie. Oh, by the way, he's King Arthur.
And they give a shout out to Army of Darkness.
Hail the King, baby. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And it's also a bit of a fantasy nod right at the end. It's like one tiny genre touchstone at the end. That you go into a tavern with your wandering bands and you ask for information and you just end up being served. Bit of a Star Wars reference, but which itself is a fantasy reference. So like it's small, but it's there.
they went in to pick a fight, which is what I love for it to end on.
Right. And it's funny because, like, also Gary is happy, but he still has not really learned anything. He is still traveling with literally his childhood friends. He's not
Hmm.
drinking anymore, but he is going to pubs to start fights. Now, he has framed it as a way to kind of validate blanks and to give them, seen as equals. So he has managed to recontextualize his needs into ways that are more socially relevant. But Gary has not really changed. He's still, that's what I say. It's not, it's his idealized self. This is
Yeah.
the best Gary can get.
Which, if you think about it for one more beat, he's going to kill all those humans in that
Yeah.
bar.
Yeah. With a
Like,
sword.
that's the next beat. He drew a sword. It's not fist fighting. We're like straight up killing people.
Right. Right. So it's still, again, like that kind of strange, slightly downbeat ending. But I think it works because in Shaun of the Dead, Shaun was very clearly a traditional protagonist. He was a bit of a fuck up, but he becomes useful and a good friend at the end. In Hot Fuzz, um, Nicholas Angel starts off as a badass, slides down into trying to understand policing in a very different world before he briefly re-engages badass. We're coming to a synthesis of being a policeman in the right moments where he lives while also keeping a small piece of his London badass cop together. So he manages to synthesize those two parts of his life, and so nice. Gary was never a good person. He's not just a loser. He's a genuinely bad person. And he ends with slightly better bad person. Andy is the actual good character in this movie. Andy would be the protagonist if he was played by Sean Pegg or Simon Pegg.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's one of the things I actually liked in the casting is that they took the thing of Nick Frost always plays a sidekick, and then okay, but what if he was actually the protagonist? But we still write the film as if he were the sidekick. And so it's actually a really even then we're like Simon Pegg gets the last shot of the film because that's how you structure these films, but Andy's the one telling the story. So it's fascinating because it was just like it really felt like, again, like I said at the very beginning, we're moving to final thoughts in the movie. It really, the whole thing felt like, here's what you think you want. We're gonna give you something else, and that's gonna make you uncomfortable because we don't want to do the exact same thing over again, and you're gonna be mad because you want the exact same over again, and we're spending the whole movie telling you why nostalgia is bad.
And it's only in retrospect that a lot of people, I think, have started to come around to the movie that weren't
Mhm.
before.
I could see that.
And
Uh,
the Andy and Gary relationship feels a lot like Samwise Gamgee and Frodo. I'm just saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I absolutely believe that. Uh, so, what are your thoughts on the movie?
I enjoyed it. Out of the three, it's probably my second favorite because
Mhm.
a lot of it speaks to me as someone that has been on many a pub crawl, but has never, I want to say, overly indulged. I understand part of like Gary's lure of it from like a childhood's perspective if you look at it as something that was so great and the bonding with your friends. But at the same time, having always been pragmatic and an adult, even when I was like 2 years old, I understand all of his friends' perspective. So it's a nice retrospective on nostalgia and the horrors of it, but also seeing people that can't move past it. And even at the end of the movie, Gary is still stuck.
And I think for me, if I could see if I had seen it at the time, or if I had seen it in isolation, I probably would have been like, yeah, it was an okay film. Um, Watching it now, specifically as the end of a trilogy, as a capstone of the creative output of these three people, and to a large degree this larger creative cast, I think it might be my favorite of the three movies. Um, And that's saying, like, I do like all 3 of them. So, like, this is very much I would watch any of them, particularly after all this, I would watch any of them in a heartbeat again. I've grown a lot better appreciation of all 3 films, but th even though this is purely a thematic trilogy, and it was a joke trilogy to begin with because they didn't intend it to be a trilogy, it really does feel like a thematic trilogy. It really does feel like because of the way this movie is paced and structured and written, and again, like we said, because it is about the negatives of nostalgia, and then to deeply engage in nostalgia while telling you why it's bad, really makes the whole movie feel a bit special. And little things like the whole thing about Gary being an aging man trying to recapture his youth at the capstone of a trilogy, because like Gary's comes 1990, Space 1999, so it wasn't that much later that Simon Kegg took off. So there's also the undercurrent of it's critiquing Simon Pegg's own career on some level. So there's a lot of substance. If you want to dig into it, you can, and I certainly did. But also, it's just a straight up fun sci-fi film that takes some classic sci-fi tropes and turns them around, which is what all of his movies have done extremely well. So, do you want to watch any more Wright movies?
Well, as we've already told them, we're going to squeeze in one more. Now it would be awkward not to do it. So I guess we should probably go ahead and do one more. We're gonna watch Edgar Wright and Marvel's Ant-Man movie. Oh wait, we can't do that because that doesn't exist.
Damn it! I can't. Now after we've done this, I definitely want to see that because that would have been amazing.
Instead, we're gonna do Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
The world.
I'm not
So
gonna
yeah,
say anything
so
about it. People have to wait for us to drop it next so they can see our thoughts on it and decide if that is a capstone of Edgar Wright's great skill set, or if it was God, I forgot the name of the movie. It was like a race, like Baby Driver.
well, if people wanted to talk to you about the Cornetto trilogy, Chris, where would they find you online?
You can come into the Discord and we could chat about all sorts of things, or you can come to Blue Sky and ping me there where I'm posting. I think I'm still posting the 20 books that have influenced me without any comments on it, which has been fun because people then ask me
Nice,
about the book and then I don't answer because it's no comments about the
right?
book. And the funniest one was someone asked me a bunch of questions about the book and then they immediately followed up their own comments like, wait a second, I think that broke the rule.
Correct.
Eddie, if they're looking for you, where can they find you?
Same. You can find me on the Darker Hue Discord. Happy to talk about the Cornetto trilogy or really anything we've done for genres. You also find me on Blue Sky as pugsteady.com. I actually recently did a long thread about uh, how being a gifted kid growing up made me bad at video games. So that was interesting to kind of dig into. But yeah, certainly if you like this stuff, come talk to us, tell us what you think. If you want more of this, you can back the Darker Hue Patreon, where we have additional episodes every month. Where we talk about movies because Chris refuses to promote his thing, chance to give him money. So give him money so you can listen to more of us stuff babbling about these things. And we will see you next week when we talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the World.